All right, I think we're good. Welcome, everybody. Hope you're well. Thank you for joining today's webinar on Microsoft Fabric for Schools. We're running today in partnership with Microsoft. My name is Sulabh Jain, and I'll be your host today. In my role here at Antares as the education lead, I work with education institutions on a daily basis to solve industry problems on the Microsoft platform. In today's data-driven world, education institutions are collecting lots and lots of data and swimming literally in a lot of information, but they often struggle to turn that information into actionable insights. That's where Microsoft Fabric comes in. Fabric is a all-in-one analytics platform designed to simplify your data journey from collecting and storing information to analyzing it and uncovering hidden gems, I should say. So over the next hour, we'll dive deep into the Fabric's capabilities. But first, let's get a quick sense of the common challenges business face when it comes to the data. Anyone ever feel like they're using multiple tools from different vendors just to stitch together a basic analysis? Or maybe you wished you could spend less time wrangling information and more time uncovering insights? If that's so, you're not alone. We come across customers daily who struggle with these issues. And Fabric tackles these issues head on by providing a unified platform that streamlines the entire data analytics process. So let's dive into the agenda today. To start with, for those who are not very familiar with Antares, I'll give you a quick introduction about us and the work we do in the education sector. I'll then pass on to our speakers, who I'll introduce you shortly, to give us an overview of Fabric, key advantages, really go into the details and go deep into the platform, and talk about some of the other things that are coming up, and including things like Copilot, etc. And then we wanted to make sure we cover some real world examples. So we'll do that at the end, where we'll give you some really good insights into the sort of insights we can generate for many education institutions. So during the presentation, you will be all on mute. So if you have any questions at any point, please type them in the chat. We will be taking questions in the end before we close, and we will do our best to answer as many questions in the call today. If we are not able to get to any questions today, we will connect with you individually by the end of the week to answer your questions. So to give you an introduction to Antares, I thought it would be great for you to know a few important things about us. We have over 16 years experience working with the education sector and have implemented a wide range of solutions on Microsoft platform that span across students, teachers, administrative staff, parents, and alumni. We specialize in data engineering, AI, application development, and modern work technologies. We have a culture of innovation and a range of IP that we bring to the table when implementing solutions or looking to solve industry problems. We have a strategic partnership with Microsoft and Data3 to help customers maximize their investments in the Microsoft platform. And we also work with Microsoft Education and the engineering teams on a number of initiatives together, including the latest AI developments and the Copilot stack. And lastly, we are part of an alliance called the Cloud Collective and provide end-to-end solutions on any of the three Microsoft clouds, whether it be Dynamics, Azure, or M365. So we've been working with schools for a long time and have implemented a range of solutions on IP that might be useful when considering different solutions. This includes implementing staff and student portals, implementing document management systems, building data warehouses, data lakes, implementing Power BI reporting solutions, to implementing Teams governance and best practices on Teams, and building intelligent applications on AI, implementing chatbots, Copilots on Azure AI, etc. We also have a number of programs, including latest AI programs that we won't cover today, but happy to discuss those offline in another session if you are interested. So let's get into the topic today. And let's do a quick poll. If you don't mind just spending, just interacting with the poll on your screen, it will be coming up shortly. Where are you currently in your data journey is the first question. There's 4 options there, just getting started, making progress. Maybe you're in an advanced stage, or you're already in an expert stage. And the second question is, what's the biggest challenge you face in advancing further along your data journey? Is it access to the data? Is it access to quality data sources? Is it data security and privacy concerns? Is it difficulty in data integration and compatibility? Or is it lack of data literacy and skills within the organization? So please take a moment to complete the polls. Once you have completed the poll, you will be able to see everyone's aggregated results, and we will also provide these results to you later in our email. The poll will remain open for the next 10 odd minutes, so if you have plenty of time to complete it as we move along our presentation. Okay, so now let me introduce you to our speakers who will be presenting shortly. Nimita is a passionate and innovative leader in the field of Azure Data and AI with more than 12 years of experience in data analytics as a cloud solution architect at Microsoft. She works with education customers in Australia and New Zealand to design, implement, and optimize cloud-based solutions that leverage the latest technologies and best practices. As part of her role, she provides best practices, recommendations, and architectural guidance on Azure Data and AI tools, and has extensive knowledge and skills in Microsoft Fabric, Azure OpenAI, Microsoft Purview, Synapse, Data Factory, and the list goes on. Nimita also enjoys collaborating with diverse and talented teams to deliver innovative and impactful solutions. Please also meet Marty or Martin. Martin has a background in data science and specializes in working with education customers here at Antares. Marty consults across the full data lifecycle, from integrating data sources, implementing Microsoft Fabric, to deploying machine learning models for deeper insights. Marty's played a key role and key part in developing our modern data platform, which encompasses best practices and learnings from previous iterations and generations of data platform implementations we have been a big part of. So with that out of the way, let me hand it over to Marty, who will talk more about Fabric. Marty, you're on mute, sorry.
Apologies. Yeah, thanks for the introduction, Sulab. Before I jump into what Fabric is and some of the nuts and bolts around that, I wanted to talk a little bit about, some of the common challenges that I come across when talking to schools. So, as Sulab mentioned, I have a focus on education. I work with, K-12 universities, TAFEs, and government departments in the education sector. And a lot of the conversations are very, surface common challenges. And one of the things that I see most often is this sort of siloed data culture within organizations. So essentially that means that, if you take a K2 school, for example, they might have a student management system, they might have, a curriculum system, and they spend a lot of time in extracting data from those systems into Excel to do their analytics. And teachers and curriculum advisors just simply don't have the time to effectively do that. I've seen spreadsheets that are, 30 columns wide with students' grades across different semesters, NAPLAN and PAT data and all that sort of stuff, color-coded. So there's a lot of time being spent on trying to come up with analytics that are useful for teachers and principals and curriculum advisors. But doing it in this sort of static way, using Excel sheets and extracting data from sort of student management systems, it becomes really difficult to create comparable data sets. So looking at trends over time, for example, or trying to identify students that are excelling or vice versa. So you can create some some programs to help those students. So it becomes not only difficult to compare these results across time, but it's very difficult to scale. So, a lot of these spreadsheets are being emailed across from one person to the next, and that's just not an environment that is easily scalable for data analytics, leading to an impact on showing value in the data analytics programs that a lot of schools and universities have. And of course, that provides limited insight. So if you don't have a sort of centralized unified data platform that has accurate data to rely on and a data culture that is capable of extracting value from that unified data source, you're not using the full capability of what you could in terms of making, critical decisions and using insights to drive successful students and a successful organization. So this is really what Fabric brings to surface. Is it tries to move away from this sort of disparate data model where we've potentially have, not just multiple systems, but maybe a data warehouse or multiple data warehouses, multiple data lakes for, sort of specific purposes. And like I mentioned, the big example is using sort of specific Excel sheets for, deriving reports and deriving insights. So Fabric essentially tries to unify all of that via what they've introduced is the One Lake, and I'll talk about a little bit about what One Lake is and why it's so important to sort of unify that data across. But before we get into that, I wanted to talk about, well, why Fabric, right? So Fabric basically allows us to capture all these different data silos and create a unified, structured approach to how we surface information across the organization, right? So I can bring in, the traditional data warehouse, which is highly structured, I can bring that structured information in, but I can also bring in unstructured information. So it might be, those sort of, static spreadsheets, or I can connect to systems, external system via APIs, and pull in information from all sorts of places into that One Lake or that data lake, where then I can just transform and provide the structure across the information that I need right now. So I don't need a big program and provide a big structure across all of my data assets. I just need to provide the structure of where I want that reporting to be surfaced right now. So it saves me a lot of time, and I can pull in information that I traditionally couldn't pull into a traditional data warehouse. Fabric will also simplify the security and how we access that unified data asset, because essentially it abstracts the way that we interact with all of the components underneath by providing it as a SaaS platform. So if you're familiar with building data lakes in the past using Microsoft Azure, you provision all of these services in Azure as infrastructure. You no longer need to do that. So all the security and the provisioning of all of these components no longer required. What's required is you essentially provision a Fabric, a Fabric workspace, and all of the all the complexities is hidden away from you, right? You can still customize and configure things, but that complexity of rolling out different components in Azure is no longer required. And so what really Fabric tries to drive here is a democratization of data assets, which essentially means we try to define different personas and assign different accountabilities to different people in the organization, right? So the business really should be accountable for their own data assets, but they shouldn't be accountable for provisioning services. But ultimately, we want to be able to drive a data culture that is comfortable in accessing data assets, deriving value from those data assets, but being accountable for that data at the same time. And so Fabric brings in this unique approach of providing all the tools that are necessary for different types of personas. So data engineers that do all the integrations, data scientists that create all the models, and analytics people that do all the analysis. But it provides all of the access to all of those people in that single pane of glass. And so it's really easy for us to be able to provide value very, very quickly, because everyone has the same approach in accessing information. And of course, that's secured via the security protocols, which Nimitha will talk about a little bit later on as well. So let's talk a little bit about these components that I've mentioned. So Fabric essentially is, I like to call it the sort of next iteration of what Synapse was, right? So Synapse, great Microsoft platform, again, allows us to pull in different data assets, create data lakes, surface that to Power BI. But now Fabric kind of does that in a SaaS environment and makes all these tools plus some extra tools available for us in a workspace that's quite familiar if you've already used Power BI, right? So if you've already had some exposure to Power BI, Fabric isn't going to be a big leap, right? It just introduces some additional components for various other people like data engineers to be able to use in that same sort of SaaS environment. And as you can see, OneLake, essentially think of this as your OneDrive for data lakes, right? It brings together and unifies all of your data assets. So whether that's a migration into OneLake or just what we call shortcuts. So if you already have some Azure data lakes, or if you have, say, Amazon S3 buckets or various other, sources of data, you don't necessarily need to migrate as traditionally you had to into OneLake. You can provide shortcuts to those assets and then use them as if they were part of that data lake or OneLake instance, right? So we can really quickly unify all of our data assets and then begin to build reports on top of them. And of course, all of this is overlaid with what's called One Security. Again, we'll talk about that a little bit later on. So I just wanted to just hone in on these different components and what they mean for, as I mentioned, different personas in the organization. So traditionally, if we had a Synapse or a Databricks environment, we would have data engineers essentially potentially using Azure Data Factory to build data pipelines, using Synapse and creating code for integrations, etc. Fabric will essentially provide all of these capabilities in the one tool. It has its own data factory that it's introduced. You can now build a traditional data warehouse using Fabric, which uses T-SQL. You can run real-time analytics and do all of the data engineering tasks that are required to integrate and pull data into a data warehouse or a data lake format. Once we do that, we can make those data assets available to data scientists. They have now access to all of the cleaned, data sets or data assets that they can run their models and train their models from. And there's multiple ways to do this. You can do this directly in Fabric, or you can integrate into Azure ML if you wish to do so through surfacing the OneLake data assets into Azure ML as well. Once that's done, we can provide these models or the data engineered data tables to our data analysts, who can then directly use Power BI to surface, different information to analyze or surface, resulting reports into our end users, right? And they can access those data assets through the data warehouse just the same way as if it was in the data lake, and use KQL for real-time analytics as well. And finally, we have our data citizens. So these are the people that access these data assets through the reports, right? So all that transition and integration is done by data engineers. We build some models potentially. We, create some reports specifically to tackle conversations and provide insights into specific areas of the organization. So that might be, a quick example of that is a kind of historical A to E view of a particular student. So that would be a report that says, hey, Timothy is in year 10, is moving to year 11, is wanting to, is unsure which subjects to choose, or is unsure whether maths is for them. We can look at the historical, subject results for mathematics and say, hey, you're actually getting A's and B's all the way through, and you're actually, in year 10, you were getting A's. and your trajectory was upwards, so perhaps harder maths would be worthwhile. So those sort of insights really quickly surface through Power BI. Very powerful to have these conversations between curriculum advisors and teachers and etc. The final thing that's been added here is what's called a data activator, and this is a game changer in terms of notification and an event-driven data analytics. So essentially what data activator does is we can nominate a data set, and based on a set of rules. So, we could say that, hey, if this data set, all of a sudden there's a new record, or if a record changes, or if, a column changes in some way, or, whatever rule we define, when that's triggered, the data activator can provide some notifications or kick off a data pipeline, or, provide updates. And so we kind of get this real-time notification and understanding of how our data assets are changing over time. So rather than having to go into a Power BI report, on a daily basis, again, teachers don't want to be wanting to do that. We can provide them with a notification to say, hey, by the way, this student's, details or attendance has changed, for example, or has hit a critical low, or some event has occurred that you need to be aware of. And so we can provide those notifications, from which then they can go back and do the analytics in the Power BI reports, right, when they need to. So it really creates, a data culture where instead of having to, constantly be sifting through information, we get notified about the critical changes. We get access to the, the simple reports that we need to look at as education providers, and it saves us a lot of time in doing that. Now, just quickly under the hood, some of the things that have been introduced is, if you're already familiar with Power BI and how it accesses information, you'd be familiar with this model of direct query or import. Essentially, if you're not familiar, the difference here was that we can create queries in Power BI that go and get us information in real time. So that's really good when, things are constantly changing and we want to access that information in the latest information when we run our reports. But it can be slow for larger data assets and larger queries, right? So, there's a second option there where we import the data and therefore increase the performance. But of course, that import needs to refresh, say daily or hourly or as often as you need, so that we've got access to that latest information. So this was really the two options we had prior to Fabric. Now, what Fabric has introduced is this concept of a direct lake. So direct lake essentially utilizes delta tables under the hood, which performance-wise are much, much faster to access, and it creates a query model that accesses these delta tables in a really high-performing way. So we can now utilize this direct lake to essentially get the best of both worlds, right? Really, really fast response times, but we get access to the latest information that is in our Fabric, data warehouse or lakehouse, if you will. So they've solved a lot of problems there. Now, in terms of the structure for Fabric, so as I mentioned, I work with a lot of schools and TAFEs and government departments in education. And as we have evolved from Synapse and Databricks, we already had built some, and Microsoft had already what's called the Open Education Analytics Program, which is an open source framework that essentially establishes a ground or a base from which you can implement some of these things really quickly and easily. So I've taken the best of all of what we had in the past and have recreated this framework for Fabric specifically. Now, what the framework does is essentially it introduces some best practice and a code base that you can deploy for free and utilize that to really quickly integrate into different data sets from different systems, pull that in and run through a process of things like data validation, pseudonymization to mask data that's private or sensitive, run through a set of transformations in a structured approach, and then make that available in a set of reports for Power BI. Now, the way that Fabric works is very similar, as I mentioned earlier, or how Power BI worked in the past. So we have workspaces that we provision, and inside those workspaces, we have various lake houses that essentially house the data sets that we want to house. We've just structured this in a way where we create different workspaces per domain. So you can see here we might have well, the control workspace is where the framework sits and controls everything else from that workspace. Then we might have specific domains for, student information, finance, HR, whatever it may be. And we kind of structure that in a sort of what's called the medallion architecture, which is, raw, trusted, or curated. You might know that has bronze, silver, and gold, or stage 1, 2, and 3. But ultimately, it's just a way to structure our information so that we can step through a set of a process that's predefined to get our data in, cleanse it, create or transform it in a way that we need to surface it, and then surface it into our Power BI reports. Now, we've also made this kind of delineation here where we have different capacities of Fabric. So when you provision Fabric, ultimately what you're doing is provisioning a capacity. So very similar to Power BI in the past, where you've licensed a certain capacity for Power BI, you're licensing a certain capacity for Fabric. And what we've done in our framework is essentially said, okay, we're going to provision 2 capacities, one for all of our data engineering assets. So basically crunching all the integrations, crunching all the transformations, all that sort of stuff, potentially on a higher sort of capacity, which we only run when we have to do these jobs, right? So once that job is done, it's then paused, and we ultimately just make those data sets available in our reporting capacity. So that way, people always have access through that data set in Power BI through that direct lake. So essentially, these are some of the concepts that are part of the framework. I don't want to go too deeply into this. If you're interested more about this, please reach out. I can talk to you more about this aspect as well. But the key important thing here is that, Fabric really works similar to how Power BI worked in the past. You provision capacities, you work in workspaces, and then you provide and create assets in those workspaces to work with. So next, I want to talk about the advantages. So this is a sort of higher level, view of, okay, so Fabric looks really great, but what can we actually use it for, right? So ultimately, as I sort of alluded to earlier, a lot of this work is already being done at potentially all of your organizations. It's just how is it done, and is it being done effectively is the key question. And so, like I said, most of the time what I see is sort of Excel-driven data analytics, or, manually derived reports out of a student management system that aren't quite the way you want them to be. So again, there's sort of manual transformation of that data. So what Fabric really allows you to do is really set a set of insight-driven reports. Say, for example, you wanted to look at attendance over time and set some benchmarks so that, when those benchmarks aren't met, you can get notified, as I mentioned earlier, and say, hey, this cohort of students, or this, this particular student is not meeting the attendance criteria, right? And all of this can be set up very quickly and easily without having to do that manual sort of work. Also benchmarks across, providing visibility on things like NAPLAN and PAT achievement data, right? So you can say, okay, well, what's the cohort that over time is achieving better results? What's the cohort that isn't? So we can, look at the differences and create intervention programs for students that really, really need to have that extra help. And of course, things like dashboards, right? So instead of using this sort of manual manipulation of data, we can define a set of dashboards that directly help the conversations that we're having. So curriculum advisors looking at cohorts, identifying with teachers that, hey, this cohort here has performed much better than this one. What are the differences? And you can view reports that directly relate to these conversations in through Power BI. So once you've set them up, obviously the data just keeps flowing in. So you always have the access to the latest information that is available in your student management system without having to go back and, each time extract and manually manipulate that information every time you have to have these conversations. So once you've done that, you can then begin to actually have better conversations, right? So one of the examples here is, there's this sort of correlation report, which I'll show you a little bit later, where we've essentially correlated NAPLAN PAT, A2E data, so subject result data, with attendance. And what that does is it allows a curriculum advisor or a teacher or, anyone that wants to look at this information to identify outliers in students, right? So there might be students that are achieving really high marks, but their attendance rates are really low. And so, what could that student be achieving if their attendance was higher, for example, or vice versa? And so we're enriching the conversations that are being had by providing access to this critical information underneath in a way that is easy to access for anyone in the organization, right? And not only that, we're able to then track over time that same information or that same student. So providing that sort of 360 view of a student across times, all the way from prep to year 12, or all the way from year 1 to year 3, year 4 at university, or whatever it may be. You can track that student's achievement across various subjects, or attendance across various years, and be able to provide and get quick insights when there's a trajectory change, right? So what has happened, and you can then intervene early rather than once it's too late, once that student's trajectory has changed too much, right? So these are some of the things that really enrich and help education advisors, especially, to understand what is going on with their students. And of course, this can be extended out to other departments as well. So we also work with a lot of finance departments that want to understand, well, where are their finances going, where does there need to be improvements, and all sorts of information about, that finance department or even HR. So there's lots of different ways to help lots of different pockets of the business in the organization. And then finally, once we have created this sort of unified data platform, we've created some reports, we've provided some additional value to teachers, our finance department, etc., we can then begin to optimize or essentially start building a set of prediction models that help to really intervene early in a student's life cycle. So, so an example of this might be that, a static model is, Timothy's doing really well in prep and he's getting A's and B's and B's and eventually they get to high school and their grades start to suffer, right? But we only know that once that begins to happen, because we're essentially just looking at historical, what has already happened, right? Once we have all this data available to us, we can create some machine learning models and predictive analytics that, based on a set of student factors, can provide some probability of this student doing well or this student potentially performing badly based on these factors. So what that means is we can intervene or provide intervention programs to that student much earlier than with the descriptive models, right? And so we can use this in all sorts of ways and it's not going to be 100% accurate every time, but it gives us some guidance into why a student might be struggling in the future and what are the factors that contribute to that, or vice versa. What are the success factors that contribute to a successful student? And we can get insights into these elements as well and use them to better other students' outcome as well. Things like at-risk students. So not only grade-wise, but behavioral and various other data sets, demographics can be brought into this so that we can really get an insight into a student's ongoing success or struggle. And of course, the next step from this is not just to make those predictions, but to also provide some level of insight on how we can make those predictions or how we can change things, right? So what are the factors that need to go into a change for that student not to decline in their grades or to increase their, increase their attendance or whatever that may be? We can provide some factors around that and provide some insights so that, again, you can intervene much earlier than you traditionally could do. So I think that's me for the moment. So I'm going to hand over to Nimitha and talk so she can talk to the security and the Copilot topics on Fabric.
Thanks, Marty. Let me take control. Okay. Hello, everyone. So let's now dive into security measures in Fabric. First of all, we acknowledge that security is a very customer-dependent subject that requires a very customized, consultative, and in-depth approach. So different customers have different security strategies and policies in place, and we recognize that one size will not fit all. And when we talk about defense in depth, it requires many layers of security to be put in place. And organizations also have preference on how they can balance certain trade-offs between security capabilities and other areas, such as ease of accessibility and productivity. So I'm going to talk at a very high level about what are the available security features in Microsoft Fabric and how we can use it in your organization and what's also coming in the future. So first, let's understand the Fabric security architecture and the SaaS platform. So Marty has already touched about the SaaS and what it is. So as he said, Microsoft Fabric is a SaaS platform, which means this is very similar to other Microsoft services such as Microsoft Office, OneDrive, and Dynamics. So if you look at all these SaaS services, including Fabric, so it's using Microsoft Entra ID, which is previously known as the Azure Active Directory, as their cloud-based identity provider. So Microsoft Entra ID basically helps users connect to these services really quickly and easily from any device or any network. Each request that connects to the Fabric is authenticated with Microsoft Entra ID, which allows users to safely connect to Fabric. It can be coming from the corporate office, or users can be working from home, or they can connect from a remote location as well. And there are many moving parts when we talk about the security architecture, and the diagram here shows the high-level architecture of Fabric security. Now, again, when we talk about security, there are two things to consider. So I'm going to focus now on the network security. So we have the inbound and outbound security. So inbound traffic is the traffic that is coming into the Fabric from the internet. So for inbound access, Fabric currently supports Microsoft Entra conditional access and private links. So you can select the right inbound solution according to your organization's needs. So let's look at the Microsoft conditional access. So organizations now basically use identity-driven signals as part of their access control decisions. Microsoft Entra conditional access brings signals together to make decisions and enforce organizational policies. So you can think of these policies or as simple if-then statements. For example, if a user wants to access a particular resource, then they must complete an action. And that action could be, say a user needs multi-factor authentication to gain access to a particular resource. And then the next one we have is private link, which also supports the inbound access. So this is currently in public preview, and private link is a tenant level feature that allows customers to limit access to Fabric from a specific VNet. So Azure Private Link and Azure Private Endpoints are basically used to send data traffic privately using Microsoft Backbone instead of going across the internet. So these are some of the options that you can use to secure your inbound traffic. And now let's move on to the outbound traffic. So there are many options to load data into Fabric in a secure manner. So let's start from left to right here, right? So we have Azure PaaS services, which now supports Fabric as a destination. So you might have existing Azure Data Factory, Databricks, Synapse, data pipelines. So all of these PaaS services can now securely load or write data to Fabric. And then if you have data sitting in your on-prem network, or if you have a data source that might be protected by a firewall or a virtual network, then you can use the on-prem gateway or the VNet gateway to make the connection secure. Apart from that, you can also use service stacks to ingest data from multiple different data sources deployed in Azure Virtual Network. For example, it could be a SQL virtual machine or SQL managed instance. And you can also secure your traffic if you have your data that doesn't reside in Azure. So you can basically use IP allow list or the whitelist on your organization's network to allow traffic to and fro Fabric. So the next important feature we recently released is the trusted workspace identity. So Fabric is now enabled as an Azure trusted service. So what that means is this will make it possible to connect and use shortcuts to data inside ADLS Gen 2 from Fabric. So even if you have that public access to ADLS blocked, you'll be able to connect to it securely without having to explicitly allow that Fabric IP address in ADLS firewall rules. So if you have your existing Azure PaaS services, for example, Synapse or Data Factory, this is very similar. So you would have this option in your network configuration where you can choose to allow trusted service from other Azure PaaS services. So that's about the inbound and outbound security controls. Now let's jump into the data access control. So Fabric controls data access using workspaces. So workspaces is something that Marty just touched on. And it is nothing but a logical container or a logical entity for grouping your items in Fabric. So within a workspace, data appears in the form of Fabric item. And when we say item, the item could be a data warehouse, or it could be a lakehouse or a semantic model. These are all the items that appears within your workspace, and users can't view or use items unless you give them the right access to the workspace. So let's see how you can apply those security controls for your workspace. So workspace is the primary security boundary for data within one lake. You manage security in the workspace through various Fabric workspace roles. So these roles are basically used to control access to workspace and the content within them. So there are currently like 4 different workspace rules, which you could use to apply to all the items that sits within the workspace. So if you are given an admin member or contributor role, then you'll get full access to the workspace. And if you are a viewer, then you can view all the content in the workspace, but you will not be able to modify it. And then further drilling down, right, we have item security. So within a workspace, Fabric items can also have permissions configured separately from the workspace roles. So item permissions are, basically used to control access to individual Fabric item within a workspace. You can use the item permissions to give a user access to a single item in the workspace without needing to give the entire workspace access. And also, one thing to note is different Fabric items have different permissions. So basically, when you assign a user an item permission, it is going to give the read permission by default. but there are many other permissions that you can apply as well. For example, the read all SQL endpoint or the read all Apache Spark to restrict the access via the Apache Spark pools. Apart from the workspace and the item permission, you have something called as compute permission. So basically, you can also set this permission within a specific compute engine. So when I say compute engine, this is your SQL engine or the Power BI engine. So the compute specific security is always enforced when you basically access the data with that engine. So the model will then enable a more granular data access control, such as you can then apply row level security, object level security, dynamic data masking, etc. And then coming soon is one security or the universal security. So this will be in public preview in Q2 2024. So what is this? So basically, like we are taking the one copy concept further. So one lake is also enhancing the security with a more finer grain control. So which means this is going to allow direct security for your tables and folders that sits within the workspace. So these security definitions live with the data and travel across shortcuts to wherever the data is used. And security defined at one lake is universally enforced, no matter like what analytical engine is used to access the data. So this is something that's coming in Q2. So it's all available in our public roadmap. I can share the link after the session. So with that, I'm just going to move to the Copilot concept in Fabric. So of course, this is a very hot topic. Now we are seeing more and more organizations adopting Copilot as an everyday companion. So Copilot, along with other generative AI features, is now available in public preview for Microsoft Fabric and also Power BI. So these features basically, empower users to transform and analyze data, generate insights, and also create visualizations and reports. So let's look at a very high level on like what is currently available within the Fabric experience and also the Power BI. So we have Copilot for Data Factory. So whether you're a citizen or pro data wrangler, Copilot helps to streamline and simplify data engineering tasks. It provides intelligent code generation to transform data with ease and also generates code explanations so that you better understand complex tasks. And then we also have Copilot for data science and data engineering experience. So with that, Copilot provides intelligent code completion, also helps to automate some routine tasks and offers industry standard code templates. And then finally, you can also use Copilot with Power BI. So this is basically to create reports, generate a summary for the report page that you created, and you can also use it to generate synonyms for better Q&A capabilities. So with that, I would like to show a short demo on Power BI Copilot. Cool. That's it from me. So if you have any questions, please feel free to post it in the chat and I'll answer shortly. With that, I'll now pass it on to Marty again to talk about some real world examples.
Thank you, Nimitha. I did want to leave some time for questions. I'm just conscious of time. So I'm just going to really quickly show you a couple, and you can get access to some of these screenshots. I'm sure we can send this out to you as well after the webinar. But this is one that I was talking about earlier. So this is really a correlation visual between showing the results of the latest results from a NAPLAN test, a PAT test, which is a yearly national testing program, and then the A2E result, which is a subject result for a student. So I've selected, in this case, the maths and the numeracy NAPLAN test and mathematics as my subject, and this shows me where the particular students have received A's via the colours. It's might be a little bit hard to see in this instance, but you can also see the different sizes of the bubbles will actually show the attendance rate. And then, you can provide these to a teacher or a curriculum advisor. When you hover over a bubble here, it will pop up with some additional information. So when you've identified some outliers, you might want some further information that will pop up, and then you can drill through to other pages to view specific information about students as well. The other one I wanted to quickly show was this historical A2E view. So this is what I was talking about when surfacing a report to potentially say a year 10 students, when you're having discussions with the parents or with the curriculum advisors to see what was the historical record for all of their subjects, and what should we do next, or where should we intervene. So like I said, I'll leave it there for the moment, but there are some other examples that I have in this slide deck that you can browse through, and if you have some questions about it, happy to take those offline as well. At this point, I'll pass over to Sulab to talk to you about how you can get started with some of these things. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you, Marty, and thank you, Nimitha, for those excellent presentations. I really enjoyed those, and I'm sure everybody got some value out of those. So the next thing is, many customers always ask us how and where do we start? And the answer to that question is, well, you need to start with a business case. You need to have quality data. And you need leadership support to be able to start on that journey. And the way you do that is by doing a data assessment, which we frequently do with our customers. The data assessment really helps you understand, where you want to be, where you are at right now, and what are some of the goals and objectives that you can work towards. So at the end of the data assessment, you get a roadmap that is very, very beneficial and is used for starting many of these projects. So with that, we are the call to action for today's webinar is if you are interested in doing a data assessment, or if you're interested in understanding how you can get started with Fabric, email marketing@antarasolutions.com.au with the subject Microsoft Fabric for Schools /data assessment. We are offering the data assessment for free for first 3 customers that send email from today's webinar. So if you are interested, please don't waste time. Please make sure you send an email as soon as you can. Now we've got a couple of minutes left, so I'll just open the chat and just see if there's any Q&As there. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask them in the chat there, and we'll make sure they are answered either on the call right now or later. And whilst I may be waiting, I wanted to ask both Marty and Nimitha about, Fabric is a new platform. Maybe any quick, any key resources that you would recommend, and also I'm looking for any gotchas that and it's probably a long discussion, but any like quick pointers you can give on some gotchas that you've seen in implementations.
Yeah, I'll cover the gotchas. So I think one of them is that, as particularly people that have used Synapse in the past, there's a slightly different approach with Fabric, and it's because it is a new platform and because it is abstracted, so the complexity is abstracted away. Not all of the functionality is there and available yet, but it is something that obviously is constantly being developed and changed. So I think one of the key reasons why we've developed our framework in accordance with Fabric is that it allows you to bring in some of this extra capability in terms of having say an ingestion manifest, for example, where you can configure how you're ingesting information in at scale, right? So it's really easy to set up an ingestion with Fabric, but it can be a little bit more complex when you're doing it at scale. So if you're doing 100, 200 tables, or if you're doing multiple systems, you want to be able to do that via a sort of simpler configuration. And that's really what the framework brings to the table. And I think if you come from a Synapse world, you need to view Fabric slightly differently to how you view Databricks and Synapse as well. You're on mute, Sulab, sorry.
All right, thank you. So any resources quickly, Namita, that you might recommend for folks who are new to Fabric and want to get a deeper understanding of the platform and what's the latest and greatest?
Sure, I've already shared a link which talks about the release plan for Fabric. And we do have a lot of documentation that's currently available as part of the learn.microsoft.com. Which covers the Fabric roadmap, also talks about the implementation strategy. So this will be very much familiar to Power BI. So if organizations are using Power BI at the moment, the implementation strategy and the BA strategy is going to be very similar. So you can refer to those documents to understand more about like how you can adopt Fabric in your organization. And also for upskilling, we do have a lot of learning courses available as part of the learn.microsoft.com, which will help you to understand more about Fabric and help you to get started with a POC or something.
Amazing. Thank you, Namita. We are out of time, so I appreciate everybody joining the call today. Hopefully you found that useful. Thank you, Marty and Namita, for your presentations. I really enjoyed them. And I'll close up the session today. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out. I'll put my details on the screen there. Feel free to reach out to us. You have the marketing offer as well, so please do use that if you are looking to do a data assessment. Thank you very much, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of the day. Cheers. Bye.
Thanks, Sam.
Thanks all.
Bye.